Chapter 10, Muscular Tissue. Topics: types of contractions, types of muscle fibers, and types of tissues. All right, muscle contraction types. Well, there are the isotonic contractions. Isotonic contraction is where you have tension that is relatively constant, and the muscle changes in length. So basically, the muscle is getting shorter or longer and moving an object. So, concentric isotonic contraction, the tension is generated is enough to allow for a shortened muscle that moves the object. So this person is flexing at the elbow in order to move the weight. They are engaging in a concentric isotonic contraction. You can also have eccentric isotonic contractions. This is when the length of the muscle increases, but slowly. So basically, it is a controlled lowering of an object. So after the person had flexed and pulled the weight toward their shoulder, they then extended at the elbow and lowered the weight, but they did this in a controlled manner, so they were using energy and muscle strength to do that. And then there's isomeric contractions. Isomeric contractions, the generated tension is not enough to actually cause any sort of movement. Muscle doesn't change in length, but force and energy are being expended. So in this case, this person is pushing the wall. They're not moving the wall. Their muscles aren't changing in length, but they are using energy and generating force. And this is isometric contractions are a basis for a whole series of exercises, for example, the plank. All right, types of skeletal muscle fibers. So there are three main types of muscle cells. You have the slow oxidative fibers. Slow oxidative fibers use oxygen to produce energy. So they have lots of myoglobin in their sarcoplasm. This makes them very red in color, and myoglobin binds oxygen and stores it in the cell. They have lots of mitochondria that use the oxygen to make ATP, and there are lots of adjacent capillaries to provide more oxygen and glucose. And slow oxidative fibers allow for continuous contractions. These muscle fibers can contract for extremely long periods of time. However, they generate very little force, so there's little power to them. So these might be important for the muscles that give us our posture, constantly contracting but not really generating a lot of force, and perhaps the muscles used in aerobics. Then we have fast glycolytic fibers. Fast glycolytic fibers do not use oxygen to produce energy. Instead, they do it anaerobically. So they have little to no myoglobin in their sarcoplasm, so they're whitish in color. And they have very few mitochondria because, again, they're not using oxygen to produce ATP, and that is what occurs in mitochondria. The cells of fast glycolytic fibers are usually pretty large in diameter compared to other fibers. Again, they produce ATP anaerobically without oxygen. And they are able to generate a few powerful contractions. So they can only work for a short time, fast, but they are able to produce really powerful contractions. So these are very important for, say, weightlifting, lifting really heavy weights and holding them up for a short period of time. And then we have the fast oxidative glycolytic fibers. These are sort of an intermediate between slow oxidative fibers and fast glycolytic fibers. They're sort of pinkish in color. They have myoglobin levels between these two. They have numbers of mitochondria between these two. They generate contractions of strength between these two for links between these two. So they're the intermediate. And they are very important for, say, walking and sprinting. All right, exercise effects on our fibers. Well, people who engage in a lot of endurance exercises, such as running or swimming, where they're doing these use of the muscles for long periods of time, well, in those muscle organs, the fast glycolytic fibers will convert over time into fast oxidative glycolytic fibers. So they'll become the intermediate form, which will be a little more effective for these kinds of endurance exercises. On the other hand, if someone is engaging in rapid strength exercises like weightlifting, looking to bulk up as it were, what happens here is their fast glycolytic fibers end up working a lot and becoming significantly bigger, aka hypertrophy. So the fast glycolytic fibers become significantly bigger. All right, muscle tissue types. Cardiac muscle tissue. Here's a slide of it where we can see the cells, and then here's the intercalated disc. There's a nucleus, there's a nucleus. You can see the dart-like banding pattern. So again, branching cells, relatively short. They end in the intercalated discs that connect neighboring cells. They display autorhythmicity, aka they're involuntary. They contract without a signal from the brain. They're involuntarily controlled. We don't have to think about making the heart beat. They possess endomysium and perimysium, but no epimysium. So they got tissue around the cells and around the fascicles, not around the heart itself. Again, 1 to 2 nuclei per cell, intercalated discs. The intercalated discs, if you look at them closely, are composed of desmosomes and gap junctions. Desmosomes act like rivets. They're dense protein structures that hold the fibers together very powerfully to prevent them from separating. And this is important because we don't want the tissues of the heart to break apart during the beating of the heart. Also found in the intercalated discs are gap junctions. Gap junctions are little tunnels between neighboring cells, allowing material to flow between them. In this case, it allows the ions for the muscle action potential to flow from one cell to the next, allowing the muscle action potential to not just move down the membrane of the cell, but also move to the next adjacent cell. Smooth muscle tissue. Again, spindly cells have thin ends and a wider middle where you see the single nucleus. No obvious striations. So again, cells are tapering at the ends, nucleus in the wide middle. Smooth muscle tissue is involuntarily controlled. We don't have to think about making our intestines contract to move along. The body does it involuntarily. Smooth muscle tissue can have autorhythmicity, can contract without a signal. Smooth muscle tissue only possesses endomysium, only has connective tissue around individual cells. There is little to no sarcoplasmic reticulum and no T-tubules in the smooth skeletal muscle cells. Smooth muscle cells. And of course, no striations. That's why they're called smooth. Contractions. How do the contractions work? Well, they have some of the similar protein structures, but they are arranged differently, more diffusely throughout the cell, so that we have thick and thin filaments connecting, forming structures that attach to intermediate filaments, which is part of the cytoskeleton, which then attaches to dense bodies, which are structures found in the sarcolemma. So the thick and thin filaments that will pull or release during a contraction are connected to the cytoskeleton, which is connected to the sarcolemma. And this means that when a contraction is signaled for and the thick filament moves the thin filament toward the middle of the structure, shortening those structures, that will pull on the cytoskeleton, which will pull on the sarcolemma of the cell, contracting the cell. Smooth muscle tissue has a slower contraction than what we can get with skeletal muscle tissue. as it shortens the cells in a somewhat different manner. There are two types of smooth muscle fibers. You have the visceral smooth muscle fibers. They form sheets of smooth muscle cells, and these cells connect to each other with gap junctions that again allow muscle action potential to spread between cells. They work collectively, they work as a group, so they only need a single signal from a neuron. And of course, as we know, they're located in hollow organs primarily. The multi-unit smooth muscle tissue, there are no gap junctions because the smooth muscle cells are not forming some kind of larger structure. They're just all together. And that means each individual smooth muscle fiber needs its own connection to a neuron. These cells then work individually rather than collectively, and they are located in structures like the iris of the eye. Aging in muscle tissue. Well, between the ages of 30 and 50, average person loses about 10% of their muscle mass. Then between 50 to 80, they lose another 40%. However, it's not always obvious that this is happening because the muscle material gets replaced with fibrous connective tissue and fat. So the person may not think they're losing muscle mass because their muscles appear to be approximately the same size, but what's happening is the muscle tissue is being replaced with other kinds of connective tissue. Now, the loss can be delayed with exercise, in some cases even reversed, depending on how hardcore you go in that exercise routine, which means, of course, everyone needs to exercise regularly, including not weightlifting exercises that lead to strength buildup in the muscles. Okay, that did not come out well, but you get the idea. All right, muscle disorders. A muscle cramp is usually a sustained, painful contraction. They think this is caused by hyperexcitability of the motor end plate, so that the muscle fiber is generating a muscle action potential without getting a signal from a neuron. And one way to deal with this is to counter it with stretching. Over years, you use your muscles too much. This can lead to tearing in the muscles. Usually this tearing is minor enough that it can get repaired on its own, but you will be very sore. This is the leading reason why people don't keep up with their exercise routines. Muscular dystrophy is a disorder in which muscles are destroyed and replaced with connective tissue. This is a degenerative disorder so that they lose more and more muscle control over time. And then myofascial pain syndrome. Myofascial pain syndrome is inflammation of the connective tissue in the muscle. Remember, we got all that connective tissue running through the length of the muscle. If that becomes inflamed, it'll become painful. And basically, whenever the muscle that's being affected is touched, even a light touch can lead to the person experiencing extreme pain. Myofascial doesn't mean in the face, it means muscle connective tissue. And that is it for this chapter.